Welcome back to Economic Rewind, where we uncover the hidden truths behind global economic phenomena. Today, we're conducting a comprehensive autopsy on one of the most shocking economic collapses in modern European history. Picture this scenario. It's 1987. You're sitting comfortably in a bustling piazza in Milan. The fashion is loud and extravagant. The hair is impossibly big. And the economy, the magnificent Italian economy, is absolutely roaring with unprecedented energy. Everyone around you is making serious money. Italy has officially become the fifth largest economy in the entire world, having just dramatically overtaken the United Kingdom in economic output. The Italians proudly call this era Il Sorpasso, the Great Overtaking. The vibrant energy is absolutely electric throughout the country. You casually order another perfectly crafted espresso, paying with a thick fistful of Lira notes that feel suspiciously like Monopoly money, and think to yourself with complete confidence, this incredible party is never going to end. Now, snap back harshly to present reality. It's 2025. That euphoric party didn't just gradually end. The economic police came with full force, conducted a complete raid on the house, and systematically burned it to the ground. Italy hasn't just slowed down economically, the entire nation has economically flatlined. Italy stands as the only major developed economy that has barely grown at all in over 2 complete decades. While the United States economy has roughly doubled in size since the turn of the millennium, Italy's gross domestic product per capita remains practically stuck in a terrifying time loop, hovering stubbornly around the exact same levels it achieved when The Matrix was playing in movie theaters across the world. We're witnessing what can only be described as slow-motion economic suicide. But here's the most twisted and disturbing part of this entire story. The seeds of this economic disaster weren't planted by the euro currency or destructive globalization policies or simple bad luck. These devastating seeds were planted systematically during those seemingly golden years of prosperity. Italy is suffering from a very specific and potentially fatal economic addiction, a persistent ghost from the past called the Lira devaluation strategy. Today on Economic Rewind, we're performing a complete autopsy on what many economists call the sick man of Europe. We're going to examine 7 specific reasons why this beautiful and culturally rich country has become economically doomed. Welcome to the comprehensive story of the Italian economic stagnation. Let's start by confronting the ghost haunting the room. You absolutely cannot understand why Italy is failing so dramatically today without first understanding exactly how it appeared to succeed in the past. And I use the word succeeded with massive, skeptical air quotes around it. You see, back in the turbulent 70s, the wild 80s, and the early 90s, Italy possessed what seemed like an economic superpower. It wasn't operational efficiency like the Swiss. It wasn't cutting-edge technological innovation like Silicon Valley companies. It wasn't German engineering precision and quality control. Italy's secret weapon was something much simpler and ultimately more dangerous: a printing press. Here is exactly how the so-called Italian economic miracle actually functioned for several decades. Let's say you owned a manufacturing factory in Turin, producing washing machines for European markets. You're competing directly against a skilled businessman named Hans, who operates from Germany. Hans invests millions of Deutschmarks in advanced robotic systems to make his washing machines significantly better and substantially cheaper to produce. You, however, don't want to invest in expensive robots. Robots require massive capital investment. Robots demand extensive employee training. Robots need ongoing maintenance. So instead, you place a friendly phone call to your well-connected friends in Rome. The Italian government carefully looks at the deteriorating trade balance statistics and says confidently, "Don't worry about competition, Luigi. We've got your back completely." The Bank of Italy would systematically devalue the lira currency. Overnight, your lira becomes worth significantly less compared to the German Deutschmark. This currency manipulation means your washing machines suddenly become 20% cheaper for Americans, French, or British consumers to purchase. Not because you made them better or more efficient, but simply because your national money has become worthless garbage. This was Italy's favorite competitive devaluation strategy, their preferred economic drug of choice. For multiple decades, this artificial approach worked surprisingly well. It kept Italian exports flying off international shelves. It allowed small, chronically inefficient family businesses to dominate global markets without ever genuinely needing to modernize operations or improve productivity. Why invest heavily in research and development when the central bank can simply slash your currency's value overnight and make you artificially competitive again in international markets? But here is the devastating dark side of that addictive economic drug. When you deliberately devalue your currency to artificially boost exports, you are essentially importing inflation directly into your domestic economy. Essential things you must buy from abroad, like crude oil, natural gas, raw materials, and industrial components, become dramatically more expensive for domestic consumers. Consequently, the overall cost of living increases substantially. To address this inflation problem, Italy implemented something called the Scala Mobile, the automatic escalator system. This wasn't a mechanical device to reach the second floor of a shopping mall. This was a comprehensive wage indexation system designed to protect workers from inflation. If consumer price inflation went up by 5%, wages would automatically increase by approximately the same percentage. This sounds absolutely great in theory, right? Wrong. This system created a devastating death spiral that would eventually destroy the entire economy. Currency devaluation directly caused domestic inflation. Inflation automatically triggered the Scala Mobile system to raise wages across all sectors. Higher wages made Italian businesses significantly less profitable and competitive. So these struggling businesses cried desperately to the government for relief. And the government, you guessed it correctly, devalued the currency again to restore competitiveness. By the early 1990s, the lira had become an international joke currency. In 1992, during a severe currency crisis, thanks partly to our friend George Soros systematically shorting everything in sight, the lira collapsed so dramatically that it was forced out of the European exchange rate mechanism entirely. Why does this historical pattern matter critically today? Because in 1999, Italy officially joined the euro currency system. Imagine taking someone who has been dangerously addicted to powerful painkillers for 40 consecutive years and suddenly cutting off their entire supply overnight. That's essentially what happened to the Italian economy. For 4 decades, whenever Italian businesses became uncompetitive against international rivals, they could rely on currency devaluation to magically restore their competitiveness without making any real operational improvements. But with the euro, this escape valve disappeared permanently. Italian companies suddenly had to compete on actual merit, efficiency, and innovation, things they had systematically avoided learning for generations. The result was predictably catastrophic. Italian productivity growth flatlined completely. Business competitiveness collapsed. Economic growth stagnated permanently. Italy was like a former athlete who had been using performance-enhancing drugs for decades, suddenly forced to compete clean against naturally gifted competitors. This brings us directly to Italy's second fatal problem, the complete and total productivity collapse. Productivity measures how much economic value each worker creates per hour of work. It's essentially the foundation of all long-term economic prosperity. Since Italy joined the euro currency in 1999, Italian productivity growth has been essentially zero. Not slow, not disappointing. Literally zero growth for over 25 years. Meanwhile, German productivity has increased by approximately 25% during the same period. American productivity has increased by over 30%. What this means practically is that Italian workers today produce roughly the same amount of economic value per hour as they did when Nokia phones were the height of mobile technology. This isn't because Italian workers are lazy or incompetent. This is because Italian companies systematically failed to invest in modern technology, advanced equipment, employee training, or operational efficiency improvements. For decades, they didn't need to improve productivity because currency devaluation provided an artificial competitive advantage. When that crutch was removed with euro adoption, they discovered they had forgotten how to genuinely compete and innovate. Italy's third devastating crisis is demographic collapse on an unprecedented scale. Italy now has one of the lowest birth rates in the entire world. The average Italian woman has approximately 1.3 children during her lifetime. To maintain a stable population, you need roughly 2.1 children per woman. What this means practically is that Italy's population is aging rapidly and shrinking consistently. Every year, more Italians die than are born. The dependency ratio, the number of retirees compared to working-age adults, is becoming completely unsustainable. By 2050, experts predict that Italy will have only 2 working-age adults for every single retiree. This means each worker will need to support not only themselves and their families, but also half of another retiree through taxes and Social Security contributions. This demographic crisis creates multiple devastating economic problems simultaneously. First, it reduces the overall size of the domestic consumer market. Second, it increases Social Security and healthcare costs dramatically. Third, it reduces the working-age population available to drive economic growth and innovation. Countries with shrinking, aging populations simply cannot generate the economic growth necessary to maintain living standards or pay off accumulated debts. Japan has been struggling with this exact same demographic challenge for over 30 years. Italy's fourth major problem is a suffocating bureaucratic system that makes conducting business nearly impossible. According to the World Bank's comprehensive ease of doing business rankings, Italy consistently ranks among the worst developed countries for business-friendly regulations and procedures. Starting a new business in Italy requires an average of 6 different procedures, takes approximately 6 days, and costs roughly $400 in fees. That might not sound terrible until you compare it to other countries. In Denmark, you can start a business with 3 procedures in 3 days for approximately $100. In Estonia, it takes 3 procedures, 3 days, and costs only $25. But the real bureaucratic nightmare begins after you actually start your business. Italian companies must navigate an incredibly complex maze of regulations, permits, inspections, and compliance requirements. The tax code alone contains over 40,000 pages of regulations and rules. This bureaucratic complexity doesn't just waste time and money, it systematically prevents innovation and entrepreneurship. When it takes months or years to get basic permits, young entrepreneurs give up and either leave the country or never start businesses in the first place. Large, established companies can afford teams of lawyers and accountants to navigate this bureaucratic maze. Small startups and innovative companies cannot. This regulatory complexity systematically protects old, inefficient companies while preventing new, innovative competitors from emerging. This bureaucratic nightmare directly contributes to Italy's fifth devastating problem: massive brain drain. Every year, hundreds of thousands of Italy's most educated, talented, and ambitious young people leave the country permanently. According to official statistics, over 200,000 Italians emigrated in 2022 alone. These aren't random people. These are predominantly university graduates, skilled professionals, and potential entrepreneurs. They're leaving because they cannot find adequate job opportunities, reasonable salaries, or business-friendly environments in Italy. Where are they going? Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia, countries that offer better career opportunities, higher salaries, and more efficient government systems. This brain drain creates a devastating negative feedback loop. The most capable people leave, reducing Italy's innovative capacity. This makes the economy even less competitive, which causes even more talented people to leave, which further reduces competitiveness. The cycle continues endlessly. Meanwhile, the people who remain in Italy tend to be older, less skilled, or less mobile. This doesn't mean they're bad people, but it does mean Italy is systematically losing its most economically productive citizens while retaining a population that is less likely to drive innovation and growth. Italy's sixth critical problem is the persistent and growing economic divide between the prosperous north and the struggling south. This isn't just about cultural differences or historical grievances. This represents a fundamental economic dysfunction that prevents the entire country from reaching its potential. Northern Italy, centered around cities like Milan and Turin, operates essentially as a modern European economy. It has advanced manufacturing, financial services, technology companies, and productive infrastructure. Northern Italian regions have productivity levels and living standards comparable to Germany or France. Southern Italy, however, operates more like a developing economy. Unemployment rates in some southern regions exceed 20%. Youth unemployment in places like Calabria and Sicily reaches over 40%. Economic productivity in the South remains significantly below European averages. This massive regional disparity creates several devastating problems. First, it means Italy cannot effectively utilize the talents and potential of millions of citizens in southern regions. Second, it creates massive internal migration pressures as young Southerners move north, leaving behind aging communities with declining economic prospects. Third, it requires enormous fiscal transfers from the productive North to the struggling South. These transfers prevent the North from investing in productivity improvements while failing to generate sustainable economic development in the South. The result is that Italy effectively operates as two different economies, forced to share the same currency, government, and debt burden. This fundamental internal imbalance makes coordinated economic policies extremely difficult to implement successfully. Finally, we reach Italy's most immediately dangerous problem, the massive mountain of government debt. Italy's total government debt now exceeds 135% of gross domestic product. In absolute terms, Italy owes approximately $2.8 trillion. To put this staggering number in perspective, Italy's debt burden is the second largest in the entire European Union, trailing only Greece in terms of debt to GDP ratio. But unlike Greece, which is a relatively small economy, Italy represents the third largest economy in the Eurozone. This enormous debt creates multiple devastating problems simultaneously. First, it consumes massive amounts of government resources. Every year, Italy pays approximately $80 to $90 billion just in interest payments on existing debt. They're not paying down the principal balance, they're just paying rent on money they already spent decades ago. That $90 billion represents dead money. It's resources that aren't building hospitals, upgrading infrastructure, reducing taxes, or funding innovative startups. It's simply disappearing into the void of international bond markets. Second, this debt makes Italy incredibly vulnerable to financial market volatility. Italy must constantly refinance its debt by issuing new bonds. If investors lose confidence and demand higher interest rates, the debt service costs could quickly become impossible to afford. This vulnerability is measured by what economists call the spread, the difference between interest rates on German government bonds, considered completely safe, and Italian government bonds, considered somewhat risky. When investors become nervous about Italy's financial stability, they sell Italian bonds and buy German bonds. This increases Italian borrowing costs and could potentially trigger a debt crisis. In 2011, exactly this scenario almost occurred. Italy came dangerously close to defaulting on its debt obligations. The entire Eurozone nearly collapsed. The European Central Bank had to intervene, with Mario Draghi's famous "whatever it takes" speech to prevent a complete financial catastrophe. But here's the terrifying reality that keeps European policymakers awake at night. Italy is simultaneously too big to fail and too big to save. When Greece experienced a debt crisis, the European Union could provide bailout loans because Greece represents a relatively small economy. Italy, however, represents the third largest economy in the Eurozone. If Italy defaults on its debt obligations, there isn't enough money in the German treasury, the French treasury, or any combination of European resources to provide an adequate bailout. An Italian default would likely trigger a financial apocalypse that would make the 2008 global financial crisis look like a minor inconvenience. Such a scenario would probably destroy the euro currency and potentially shatter the entire European Union political project. So Italy remains trapped in what economists call a zombie state. They can't spend their way out of the crisis because of the debt constraints. They can't grow their way out because of productivity and demographic problems. They're simply drifting economically, refinancing their loans, praying that interest rates remain low, and hoping that the next global crisis doesn't push them over the edge. It's a high-wire act with no safety net, performed by an economic acrobat who is getting older, weaker, and less stable every single day. So, is this the end of the story? Is Italy destined to become a third-world country with first-class historical ruins? I realize this economic rewind analysis has been quite heavy and pessimistic. We've examined the addiction to currency devaluation, the completely flatlined productivity, the demographic collapse, the bureaucratic nightmare, the devastating brain drain, the north-south economic divide, and the overwhelming mountain of debt. On the surface, the situation appears completely hopeless. But Italy has surprised the world before with remarkable resilience and adaptability. This is a country that rose from the ashes of World War II to become an industrial powerhouse in barely 20 years. This is a nation with immense reserves of private wealth and savings. Italians remain famously good savers, even when their government operates irresponsibly. Italy continues to be a global superpower in culture, luxury goods, tourism, fashion, and lifestyle industries. The Made in Italy brand remains one of the most valuable and respected assets on the planet. Italian companies like Ferrari, Prada, and Barilla command premium prices worldwide based purely on their Italian heritage. But to survive and thrive in the 21st century, Italy desperately needs a revolution. Not a violent political revolution, but a comprehensive cultural and economic revolution. They need to systematically shatter the gerontocracy that prevents young people from leading. They need to completely smash the bureaucratic system and embrace digital transformation. They need to stop protecting dying microbusinesses and start encouraging the development of globally competitive champions. They need to transform the South from a land of government subsidies into a land of genuine economic opportunity and innovation. This represents an incredibly tall order. It requires painful structural reforms that no politician wants to implement because they would likely lose the next election. The necessary changes would hurt powerful interest groups in the short term, even though they would benefit the entire country in the long term. But the alternative to these difficult reforms is a slow, comfortable slide into complete economic irrelevance. Italy risks becoming what economists call the Venicification of the entire peninsula, a beautiful but economically stagnant theme park for Chinese and American tourists, inhabited primarily by tour guides and restaurant workers, remembering a time when Italians used to build empires and lead innovation. The choice ultimately belongs to Italy, but the economic clock is ticking relentlessly, and the alarm has been ringing continuously for over 20 years. What do you think about this analysis? Can Italy successfully turn around its economic trajectory? Or is the curse of the Lira's legacy ultimately fatal for long-term prosperity? This has been Economic Rewind, where we uncover the hidden economic forces shaping our world. If this deep dive into Italy's economic challenges provided valuable insights, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We'll continue examining the most important economic trends and crises affecting global markets. Remember, understanding these economic patterns isn't just academic exercise. These trends directly impact investment decisions, career choices, and long-term financial planning for anyone invested in European markets or considering opportunities in Italy. Thank you for joining us on Economic Rewind. Until next time, keep analyzing, keep learning, and keep following the money.